Welcome to part 3 of our lecture here about the course Growing an Entrepreneurial Venture. We're going to talk a little bit about 12 very typical failure modes for businesses. So this is looking at businesses that have started and they never quite make it to sustainability. So we're going to dive into these a little bit, talk about some characteristics, and hopefully provide you with some insight and knowledge about the various different ways that you can prevent this. Let's go. So one of the very first challenges in a growing business is hiring additional employees. For many people, when they start a business, they've never done this before. Or if they worked in a larger business, it was the HR department that took care of that. So now you have to figure out how to do that on your own. So here's a couple of things to think about. Number one, I assume if you're starting a business, you are an A quality person. You're driven, you're motivated. And what happens is A's typically hire other A individuals because they have a lot of self-esteem, they're confident, they're good, so they're not worried or threatened by another person who shares a similar type of characteristics. But it's said that B's hire C's, meaning that if you're a B quality person, you're not going to hire an A quality person because that person's going to be threatening to you. What you're going to do is hire a C quality person. So this is something to think about if you, as the founder of the business or the leader of the business, delegate the hiring. Let's say maybe you've hired your team, but now you're asking them to hire their teams. So just be careful about this phenomena. It happens very frequently. Another interesting thing that can happen is you hire the wrong people too early. There's two of you, your product's not really ready to hit the marketplace, and you hire a real senior VP of sales. That person gets frustrated because they don't have anything to do. They're used to selling. You get frustrated because you brought them in to do something, maybe you weren't quite sure, excuse me, and it doesn't work out very well. The other thing is, I think somebody once told me they've never fired anybody too soon. Most of the times you keep the wrong people too long and you keep employees around much longer than they should be. At some point in time, you realize that that's not the right person for the job. And in all reality, they most likely realize they're not the right person for the job. So, have that conversation, say it's time to move on. You can be passionate about it, or compassionate, I should say, about it, and it'll work out. And they probably know it as well. So don't keep people too long. Be aware of and avoid personal relationships. This is just a quagmire. In our venture business, we've invested in some companies that have had significant others working there, and in other words, a husband and a wife as an example. And when stuff starts turning bad, it makes things difficult, right? And then how can a wife fire a husband or vice versa? It just gets complicated. So just try to be aware of those things. Don't hire relatives. Don't let other people hire relatives or spouses or children. It just complicates things. Every company is missing skill sets, particularly early companies. So know what they are and try to fill the critical ones. Use a board of advisors or a board of directors to fully vet key candidates. If you're hiring a senior level person, why not have them talk to several members of your board of advisors or your board of directors? Typically, your board of directors are very experienced. They sort of will bring a different perspective to the game, and you can probably get some great information from them. So that's another thing that you can do to avoid or to help you through this whole hiring challenge that exists. Let's look at the next one. Let's talk about the chasm. Some people call this the valley of death. Other people call it the chasm. A guy named Geoffrey Moore wrote a book called Crossing the Chasm. Excellent, excellent book. And it's, excuse me, it's really about getting your first product out there to customers early. It's the hardest thing to do. If you're, as other people have said, if you're not embarrassed when you ship your first product, you've waited too long. You got to get products out there early. Why, you might ask? It's because you'll get much better feedback from the marketplace than you ever will in trying to perfect your product inside the four walls of your business. So, get products out early, let the market give you feedback, and then change the product and reintroduce it, and reintroduce it, and reintroduce it. It's very, very important. A lot of companies get products out there that they waited much too long to do, so the company thought it was perfect. Well, jeepers, it still's not perfect, and you're going to have to go back and change it based upon input you're going to get from your customers. And what's happened is you've run out of money because instead of introducing the product after 12 months, you've waited to introduce the product until 18 months have gone by, and you've lost that time and you can never get it back. Focus, focus, focus. Niche markets are the easy pickings for a small company. $100 million market is really a very, very big market for a company that has $1 or $2 million in sales. So don't model yourself after the gigantic companies that already exist out there. Find your niche, satisfy those customers, and then expand it. And that's really what we're going to talk about in this course. But however, first you have to find that niche. So very, very important. It's a great book. Crossing the Chasm is a great book by Geoffrey Moore. I highly recommend it. If you haven't read it, you should add it to your reading list. Let's look at the next one. So we're going to talk about cash, not Johnny Cash, but the green stuff. So one of the interesting things about a young business is everything revolves around cash. Your P&L statement is less important. What's really important is cash flow. And sometimes too little money is a problem. If you just don't have enough cash or money on hand to maybe buy some equipment that you need to either design or build or test your product, or if you have to, because of the industry segment you're in, you have to open an other regional office someplace and you just don't have enough cash, that can be a problem. But just as often, too much cash can be a problem. There's lots and lots of examples of companies that, really only needed, 10 million bucks, but they went out and raised 30 or 40 or 50 million because they could. And then what's the next thing they do? They're buying ads at the Super Bowl. So it's really, it's a tightrope you have to walk here. And you want to have enough cash to be able to do the important things. One of the ways that I think about it is I like to think about cash. Your first slug of cash should be sufficient for about 12 months. The next slug for about 18 to 24 months after that. And then the next slug for 24 to 36 months after that. So it's sort of like 1 year, 2 years, 3 years. And that should, you're going to plan that out. It's easy to plan out 1 year when you're starting up. It's very difficult to plan out 3 years. Lack of discipline is always a problem. Right? This cash is the most sacred resource you have in a company, probably next to time. So spend it very wisely. You always have contingencies in your budget because things are going to take longer. Things are not going to work out like you expected them. So build in a cushion. Don't plan to spend every dime. And debt is generally a bad idea for a startup. First of all, you can have a hard time finding it. No one wants to give you any debt or a loan. And it's just a hard, difficult hole to crawl out of. Let's take a look at the next one. Customers and competition. Know both of them really well. Talk to customers early on in the process. One of the big mistakes we made in the first company that I was a co-founder of is we didn't talk to customers until we had our product design finished. And it was too late by then. Talk to customers early. Get out there early. Meet with customers. It's a scary thing to do because sometimes they don't want to meet with you. Sometimes they give you real criticism about your product that you don't want to hear. So you got to get these folks identified. You got to interact with them and engage with them. Try to pull together a group of 5 to 10 alpha or beta testers, people who are willing to help you develop the product, or I should say refine the product by giving you feedback. You can promise them, extra support. You can give them a lower price. There's several ways you can do that, but having 5 to 10 good beta testers is really, really important. Also, it's really important to put yourself in the shoes of your customer, because oftentimes what they tell you the pain is not really the real pain that they're trying to solve. So what I mean by that is a customer may tell you that their current system isn't fast enough. So you're going to build them, so you think, okay, we need to build something faster. But the real problem with their current system is reliability and not speed. So you're going to have to probe that a little bit. You're going to have to work on understanding it and spending some time with your customer. Interesting thing about competitors. It's amazing what they will tell you and say, particularly when you go to a trade show or other types of events. They're often bragging about their products, who their customers are, what their features are, what new products they're coming out with. Listen, there's a lot you can learn there. The other thing to remember is that competitors are also making progress and moving forward. So if you're coming out with a product that is 20% better than a competitor's current product, you can be pretty darn sure that they have the next version of their current product in the pipeline that's going to be 20 or 30% better. And they're going to introduce it either before you or shortly thereafter you. And existing customers are just going to buy that. They're not going to switch suppliers. So you really have to think that through. You really have to target your products to be significantly better than competitors. Always deal with your customers honestly. If your product's going to ship late, let them know. Let them know in advance. Excuse me, the worst thing you can do is lie to a customer, because they're probably making commitments to somebody else. And if they feel that you've deceived them, that's a hard hole to dig yourself out of. Let's take a look at the next one. Let's talk about being bold and disruptive. This is really key for a startup. Most of the times, a new startup is going to be in a space that a lot of people don't think exists, or they're not sure it's going to work. There's a lot of risk with it. That's why in the venture business, 5 out of 10 companies they invest in the seed stage fail, because they don't have it right, or they're too early, or they're too late. So the point here being is that a non-consensus thesis is probably the best. What I mean by that is more than likely not everyone will agree that the direction you're headed in, the product you're coming out with, or the service you're coming out with is the right one. But the fact that there is that disagreement probably means that it's going to be bold and it's going to challenge the status quo, which I think is good. The other thing to remember, and we touched on this a little bit in the last slide, is that incremental changes do not work for startups. Large companies are very, very good at incremental changes, right? The established car companies come out with the 2016 model, which looks a lot like the 2017 model, which looks a lot like the 2018 model, right? It really doesn't change all that much. IBM's products, take any big company, you know, the next version looks, it's 10% better or 20% better than the last one. So for a small company, you really need to do something that's bold and disruptive. You really got to think about what the vision for your company is, because that's going to be the guiding light or the North Star for what you're going to accomplish. That doesn't mean you have to have some corny mission statement or vision statement, any of those things, right? But just be clear about what you're trying to achieve so everyone is rowing the boat in the same direction. In most cases, you got to get the technology right, and the technology is not a product, right? It's one of the things that we have to be careful of. Oftentimes people think the technology is the product. No, it's not. Technology enables the product to do certain things, but the product is the thing that's really important. The technology less so. But if you get the technology wrong, sometimes you're in big trouble. Look at it this way. If you're selling personal computers, really the technology here is about using Intel chips, and other brands like AMD or others are really, for whatever reason, the marketplace is not receptive to them. And those other brands, AMD for example, are only 10 or 15 or 20% better when they first come out than the Intel brand. So customers stick with Intel. So you got to get the product right, you got to get the technology right, and the market, you got to know people are going to buy it, and you got to figure out who's going to buy it. So those things are really important. There's something called white space markets. Those are market segments where there's very few competitors or maybe none at all. We're going to talk a little bit about first to market in some follow-on classes. But that's sort of what white space markets mean, is stay out of the crowded spaces. Now, contrary to that, look at Google. When Google came out with their search engine, right, they were in a very, very crowded space. But what they were able to do was they figured out a way of monetizing their search engine. And that became a very dominant factor in their success. Figure out how to minimize the impact of the incumbent or the established companies, right? So if you come out with a new light bulb and GE sells their light bulbs for $1 and you're going to sell yours for 95 cents, and that's your main advantage, GE can crush you. They'll just lower the price of their light bulbs to 94 cents, and in 6 months you'll be out of business. So the incumbents are going to react to your product or your service, and you have to think about how can I minimize, number one, what they can do, and the impact of what they do has on my business. The other thing is sometimes you're just too early in a marketplace. I don't know if you remember, but Apple introduced something called a Newton way back in the 90s, and it was a dismal flop. But I'll tell you, it was very much like a smartphone. It had a lot of the same types of features, and it was called a Newton. And the technology wasn't quite ready, the market wasn't quite ready, and the product wasn't quite ready, and it didn't make it. So sometimes you're too early. And sometimes you're just overreaching. You're just trying to bite off way more than you can chew. And that limits your ability to grow your business. So let's take a look at the next one. Company culture is really important. And a tone for company culture is set by you, the founder or the CEO or the leadership team. It really defines everything. And you can look at various different companies, and each company has its own culture. Some you'll fit right in with and it works for you. Others will not work for you. Think about the type of culture you want to have and make sure you, as you add people to your organization, that they fit within that culture. Make sure they understand what the expectations are. Be clear about it, over communicate it. Um, I'm not saying there's one culture is right and another culture is wrong. There's a wide spectrum of cultures, and they all seem to work to various different degrees. Um, but it's your job as the leader or leaders of a company to help define that culture, maintain it, and nurture it. One of the important elements of a culture is the ability of the organization to learn. And what I mean by that is, how do you reward success? How do you recognize somebody who tried something new, but it didn't work out? There are some companies where if you try something new and it doesn't work out, you get put into what I call the penalty box, right? You get pushed off to the side and maybe never seen from again. Other companies understand that if you're in a rapidly changing marketplace, you're going to come out with products and services or whatever that may not work all the time. And it's just part of what they do. And let's take a look at what we learned from that experience and move forward. Take a look at Google. I mean, they've had several products that they've launched and they haven't quite worked very well. Look at Google Hangout, right? That hasn't been a great success. There's several of them. Look at Apple. Apple TV has been around for how many years and it's still sort of floundering around. They've never quite gotten the formula right. So there's lots of examples of those types of things. And some companies keep trying. There's other products that the companies just pull off. They try to maybe rename it or reconfigure it, or they just get out of that business altogether. Be passionate about your business. Work on your business, not in your business. Make sure that people know where you're trying to go. Make sure that they feel that that's a good place to go. And it'll be very, very good. So culture is very important. We'll have one of our speakers who talks in class. We'll talk maybe a little bit about culture. He's the one CEO that I know that not only talks about culture, but he works on the culture of his business every day. And he's been very, very successful. Let's take a look at the next one. So we're going to talk about network, your network, and advisors. So I think I've had probably 10 or 11 different jobs in my 40 plus years that I've gotten out of graduate school. And in those 40 plus years, I've sent my resume in to a lot of PO boxes and responded to a lot of job ads. But all of the jobs I've gotten are a result of me knowing somebody somewhere and somebody making an introduction on my behalf or a connection on my behalf. I did not get one job ever responding to a job ad. So your network is really, really important. It's not only important to you personally, but it's important to your business, right? So people buy products and services from companies and people that they like. And not only will it provide you with customers, so don't think of it only in terms of customers, but also think about it in terms of employees and being able to source employees, and also think about it as partners and business partners. Lots of times, some of the greatest opportunities to grow your business is to partner with somebody, partner with an existing company. So you can take advantage of, let's say, their distribution channel, or you can take advantage of some technology they may have, or vice versa. So be visible, get out there. That means sometimes you might not see the direct result of going to some networking event. Pick them carefully, but they do pay off because then your name or the name of your company is further up people's lists and in their minds. Be visible. That's important. Your company should be visible. That doesn't mean you have to buy billboards on side of the highway, but think about how you market your company and your brand. Think about advisors. right? What you want to do is what works really good is to be have some advisors, whether they be a board of advisors or a board of directors, that sort of walk down the same road or similar roads that you have walked down. Um, and hopefully they can help you from tripping or falling into those potholes. So pick good ones. The good ones are very busy. You may need to compensate them in some manner. I think for a small business, a small growing business, if you have 4 or 5 or maybe 6, 7 advisors, that's probably plenty. I don't think you want to have 10 or 15, because then it's really just, you can't manage that many yourself. And change them out. At some point in time, they get bored, or their ability to contribute starts decreasing, their value starts decreasing to you, and your company has grown, and they're an early stage person, and your company's no longer early stage. So shake their hand, say thank you very much, and get somebody who maybe knows the next steps that your company will be taking. Let's take a look at the next one. So a little bit about, again, board of directors or board of advisors and or investors. Sometimes they're the same, or certainly they sometimes have overlap. Again, this is part of your network. You need to have strong relationships with these folks. One of the great roles that a board of advisors takes is, if you have an idea, it's someone you can bounce that idea off of. And if you want to try out something new, some new concept, some new idea, something you've been thinking about, bounce it off of them first. Get their input. You'll find that that's a lot less disruptive than if you try out those ideas inside your business right away. Because sometimes in an organization, if you start talking about something, people listen because you're the boss, you're in a leadership role, and all of a sudden they think that's what we're going to do. And in your mind, it's just an idea or a concept. So sometimes the board of advisors or board of directors is a great filter and sounding board. Investors are really important, right? So they're giving you money, it's their money. Treat them well, use them as, if appropriate, as advisors. I think it's good to provide updates, monthly, quarterly updates. If you're having a board meeting, then make efficient use of their time. Come out with a pre-read for the board, so that you're not just going through rudimentary stuff at the board meeting, but you actually have a good deep conversation about a particular product or two. Don't withhold bad news from these people. They deserve to know what's going on. The board can help you, and the investors certainly deserve, and you fundamentally have an obligation to tell them any bad news along with the good news. And any big decisions that you're going to make, any changes, any pivots, let them know first. Get their input, get their help. If you need introductions to potential big customers, they can often help. So utilize them. They're very valuable and important. Let's think about the next one. Yep, one of my favorite movies is The Good, the Bad, and the Ugly. Sometimes things are not going to go really well, and you want to have thought through ways of thinking what you're going to do about it. So this is not just a cash budget item. Sometimes it is. Sales didn't go greatly as expected, so you gotta take 20% out of the budget. So who are you gonna let go? It's best to kind of think about these things before you need to do them, so that you're not making those decisions without a clear mind. They're challenging enough as it is, but thinking through them earlier, before the crisis hits, and then reviewing what you developed pre-crisis, and saying, okay, this still makes sense, or no, this doesn't make any sense at all. But that's a good sounding board for yourself. Again, this is also a great place to get your board of advisors involved in. The same thing is true if you're growing, right? If you obtain an investment of $5 million, and now you're going to really grow the organization. You should have thought through this before you get the money comes in, so you can uh, make, again, the right decisions, hire the right people in the right places, make the investments you need to do within the business. And these are all things you can do with the team. When the team agrees that, hey, if we got to do a 20% cut, we're going to do it here, or we're going to grow by 20%, we're going to do it here. That always builds consensus, it builds support, and it helps with the company culture as well. With each of these things, you should try to understand the risks and the ultimate impact that they'll have. The ugly is going to happen, right? No company grows without stumbling on occasion, and so you want to think through what the implications there are and how you're going to deal with them. And again, if you have a plan going into it, you'll come out the other side much better. Even if you don't follow the plan verbatim, it'll make you smarter because you had the plan going in. Okay, let's take a look at the next one. Having a clear vision for where you're going is important. What's the ultimate goal? That's really, really important. There's a wonderful story about Nike back in the days when it was a smaller company. Its vision that it talked about all the time was beat Adidas. Back in the 70s and 80s, Adidas was the big shoe company in the world, and Nike's goal was to beat Adidas. And it's interesting, you can plot Nike's, and that was their mantra, and they talked about that a lot. They always talked about beating Adidas. It helped them make business decisions, right? Is this move going to help us beat Adidas? Is it not? That helps you decide whether to do something or not to do something. So understanding what that ultimate goal is can help in your decision making, and it's extremely important. And you can plot this out, but I forget what year it was, but I want to say late 90s, Nike actually beat Adidas. And then Nike's performance kind of faltered because it was like, okay, now that we've done that, what do we do next? So it's a real challenge. But it's important to have a vision. What's your ultimate goal? Your mission is sort of how you get there. And clarity in both is really, really important for employees, for other stakeholders, your investors, your board, etc. Everybody should know where you're trying to go. And you can never say those things too often. You can never communicate them too often. And if you want to grow, remember, growth is change. Many people are uncomfortable with change. So being clear why the change is coming, why the change is important, how it's going to help the business, how helping the business helps its employees, and vice versa. Those are all important things to really clearly communicate. So we call this clear mission and vision, but I really think about it much more around the sector of communication and making sure you communicate the mission and vision of your business very clearly so everybody knows where you're going. Let's take a look at the next one. So every company needs a set of metrics, right? Sometimes they're called KPIs, or key performance indicators. So figure out what's important to measure the performance of your company. You should have, I don't know, 5, 6, maybe 10. I've seen lists as large as 12 to 15, and they start becoming meaningless at that point. I would say if you had a half a dozen or fewer key metrics that are an indication of how your company is doing. One is usually top line sales or top line revenues. That's usually a good one. Customer retention is another example of one that's good. In other words, what's your customer turnover? How many of your existing customers are deciding to leave you to go with someone else? In some industries, that's much easier to measure than in others. You don't need to measure everything, right? But you should know how to measure everything. You don't need to, but you should know how to do it. It's really important that you know what the key ones are. And the key ones change, right? The key metrics for a young startup with 3 or 5 employees is a lot different than for a company with 50 people that's growing. So In addition to, I just thought of one other thing. In addition to sales, top line sales, cash on hand or cash in the bank is also a real important metric. And how much runway you have left with that cash is also a real important metric. So along these lines, schedules are an important metric. So it's not just financial, right? It's you have a deadline for introducing a product or hitting a certain revenue goal or making the next generation of a product. And if how are you doing on that schedule? Are you going to hit the goal? So schedules are really, really important. So you got to measure progress against those scheduled. So those things are really important. And they're different for each company. They have a lot of similarities in companies, but think through what works best for you. Let's go to the next one. Okay, so here we are on the last one. And this is always a challenge. It's doing the most urgent thing first. That is oftentimes difficult to figure out. Sometimes we like to do the easy things first, but that may not be the most important thing. So the most urgent thing first question is usually, what is the most urgent first question? So sometimes you have to figure it out and get the team together and say, okay, we need to double the top line of our company this year. How are we going to do that? It may be a complicated answer, but if that's what you're focused on, that's the most urgent question. Most importantly, though, a lot of companies get paralyzed because they can't figure it out or they can't come to an agreement. Then you got to start somewhere. So just start. Don't be afraid to ask dumb questions of each other, of your team. Again, this goes back to culture. You should not frown upon people asking dumb questions. And you will have a different set of urgent first questions for each part of your business, right? So think of it this way. There's what's the most important question for the overall business? What are the most important questions for each division or department or whatever? But what I mean by first question, urgent question, is, okay, what about this, right? If we don't figure this out, we're going to lose customers. So that would be an urgent question. If we don't improve the paint quality on our product, we're going to lose customers, right? So the paint quality is probably more important than the color at this point or some other element of the product. So figure out what's the most important thing and work on it. So this is the end of this session where we had these 12 points that I wanted to take you through. Again, we have an existing business. These are all things that are involved in an existing business. Each one can probably be a full course on its own, but I wanted to take you through these kind of quickly and get you to think about them and put some thoughts out there for you to ponder and chew upon. So with that, I'm going to close this session. Again, if you have any questions on this part, post them to the forum and I will respond to them as soon as I can, and we'll keep moving forward. Thanks.